Okay, good afternoon. Today's topic will talk about the following. At the end of this chapter, you should be able to describe symmetric encryption and asymmetric encryption. So, how does symmetric encryption works? Again, the idea here is to make sure that the data that is not intended for the recipient will not be read by others. And to do that, we need to perform some transformation on the input data so that the attackers or others will not be able to read the data. And to do that, as you can see in this example, you have the plain text input, and then we denote it as X, and that X will be the input to an encryption algorithm. And in addition to the plain text, we also have a key, and that key will be used to generate the ciphertext, and the ciphertext will be transmitted. As you can see in the illustration, the encryption is a function with parameters key and X noted by Y. And then at the receiver end, or the recipient, the decryption algorithm will take as input the transmitted ciphertext Y, and then it will also need the input, the key, as input, and then it will perform a decryption, or it will run the encryption algorithm to generate the plain text. So that's how simple it is. Now, it is possible that there can be many receivers, and that means that they're all going to use the same key. Now, there are two requirements for successful symmetric encryption. The first one is that the opponent should not be able to decrypt ciphertext or discover the key even if he or she is in possession of ciphertext with plain text that produce its ciphertext. So that is essential. There are two main inputs for the encryption algorithm. You have the plain text and the key. Now, if the opponent or the attacker has possession of the ciphertext and the initial or the plain text where the ciphertext was derived, then the symmetric encryption should make sure that it is not possible for the opponent to be able to derive the key from the given plain text ciphertext input or available plain text in ciphertext. And the second requirement is that the sender and the receiver must obtain the key in a secure fashion, and the key must be kept secure. Now, the idea here is that if you use the same channel where the ciphertext was transmitted, then it's possible that attackers may also obtain the key if you let the key be transmitted over the same channel as the ciphertext. Now, how do we attack symmetric encryption? So it seems like a difficult thing to do. There are two approaches of attacking symmetric encryption. The first one is cryptanalysis. Now, in cryptanalysis, the idea is you rely on the nature of the algorithm. Most symmetric encryption algorithms are actually published or well documented and are made available to the public. This means that anyone can study the algorithm and try to find some problems with the algorithm or with the implementation of the algorithm. And also, another requirement for cryptanalysis is the person doing the cryptanalysis should have some knowledge of the characteristics of the plain text. For example, if a plain text was written in the English language, then most likely the plain text will contain characters or letters from A to Z. And with that knowledge, the analysis can be done easily. And it's also possible that to do cryptanalysis if you have plain text and ciphertext pairs. Meaning, let's say you have this given plain text and then the corresponding ciphertext generated by running the algorithm even without the key. And the last one is to be able to exploit the characteristics of the algorithm to deduce specific plain text or key. Now, the second attack to symmetric encryption is called the brute force attack. Now, the brute force attack the idea is to try all the possible keys on some ciphertext until you get an intelligible translation into plain text. And usually, it takes some time to do some brute force attack. An example would be guessing a password. Okay? So to do that, you need to have a dictionary of possible passwords, and you have a lot of permutations to be able to do that. Now this figure here shows the time it will take to be able to perform a brute force attack by performing an exhaustive key search. So you have a key, and the key is usually of certain length in bits, and then in order to try all these keys you have to go over all the possible keys. As an illustration, if the key size is 32 bits, then there will be 2 to the 32 possible keys. And then if you represent that by exponentiation, so that will be 4.3 times 10 to the 9 keys. And if, let's say that the time it takes to run the key, to use the key in the encryption algorithm is 2 to the 31 microseconds. So it will take 35.8 minutes. So the time required to 10 to the 6th decryption per microsecond. So that's how long it will take. There are two types of symmetric encryption algorithms. You have the block cipher and we have the stream cipher. The block cipher, it processes the plain text input in fixed size blocks, and it produces a block of ciphertext of equal size of each plain text block. In this table, you can see three algorithms. You have DES, triple DES, and AES. And denoted also in the table are the size of the plain text block that is processed and the size of the ciphertext block. So as you can see, the sizes of the plain text and the ciphertext are the same. For the key size, for the DES you have 56 bits. For triple DES and AES, they require more bits for the key. Now let's start with the data encryption standard, or DES. So DES uses a 64-bit plain text block and 56-bit key to produce a 64-bit ciphertext block. The main concern about this algorithm, which we'll discuss the details in chapter 20, is that the algorithm is susceptible to cryptanalysis. As mentioned previously, cryptanalysis will be done by the knowledge of an understanding of the algorithm itself and some plain text and ciphertext combinations or pairs. And also the size of the key for DES is only 56 bits. So it's quite easy to guess with modern hardware. Maybe during the early days it might be difficult to crack DES, but nowadays with improved computing power and available, let's say, the GPU, it is now possible to try a lot of keys at the same time or in parallel. That's why this one is quite easy to guess. So the average time for exhaustive key search is given in this table. So you have here the different, for example, the des. So we'll have 2 to the 56 keys, 2 to the 56 possible keys, and then if the time required at 10 to the 13 decryption per microsecond, then it will take 1.125 years to crack. Okay? But nowadays, this 1.125 years can be done in a few months or even in a few days. Okay? So the idea, the main takeaway here is that the key size should be large in order to prevent an exhaustive key search. Now the next algorithm that we're going to talk about is 3-des or triple des. The idea here is to repeat the des algorithm 3 times, and it uses either 2 or 3 unique keys instead of 1. And it has a slightly bigger key size or larger key size, which can be 112 or 168 bits. It is basically much more secure because of the repetition, but also slower because of the additional steps. And the block size is still 64-bit, and ideally you should have a larger block size, even in the ciphertext. Well, the last algorithm is the advanced encryption standard, which is basically a replacement for des and triple des. And it was selected in 2001, basically by Reindel, okay? And it was published as a standard as FIPS 197. So it's also a symmetric block cipher, and it uses 1 to 8-bit data. For 1 to 8-bit for the data block or the plain text block, and 128, 192, 256 bits for the keys. So this means that compared to des, which is 64-bit for the plain text, for the size of the blocks for the plain text and ciphertext, in AES the size of the plain text block being processed and the ciphertext are 128 bits, and is also widely available commercially. And there are several implementations of this, and in the lab we're going to look into the OpenSSL implementation of AES. Now another symmetric encryption approach is what we call the stream cipher. So we discussed block cipher. The main difference between block cipher and stream cipher is that block cipher processes the plain text in blocks of bits, as mentioned earlier. For example, the des 64 bits, for AES 128 bits. Now, stream cipher, on the other hand, does not process the plain text as a block, but rather it performs the encryption bit by bit as the bit enters the encryption process. As you can see in the illustration, you have the plain text byte stream, and you have a pseudo-random number generator, which generates a certain number or keys based from a key, and then performs the encryption, as you can see in the plus sign here, and the ciphertext is processed. So here is the meaning of that. Processes the input elements continuously and producing output one element at a time as it goes along. It also encrypts 1 byte at a time. Okay, so we'll stop here, okay, and then we'll proceed with the topic on the details of the algorithms, symmetric encryption algorithms, in the next chapter.